Long ago in ancient Greece, there was the Delphic sanctuary situated on the southern slopes of Mount Parnassus, often covered with clouds. Pilgrims usually went there by mountain paths and roads to pray and offer sacrifices to the god Apollo. Under the giant cliffs of the Phaedriatis, rising above the picturesque valley, pilgrims rested, washed, and entered the Delphic sanctuary near the Castalian spring. The god Apollo was the son of Zeus, the powerful king of gods and humans. The most famous copy of the god's statue by Leocharis was erected in the ancient Belvedere courtyard in the Vatican. Apollo was considered a being that could not tell a lie by his very nature. Priestess of the Apollo temple, Pythia, reproduced Apollo's predictions in the name of the great god Zeus. Sitting on the Delphic tripod, she pronounced answers to the pilgrims' questions. Pythia was in a trance because of the fumes coming from the cleft under the temple of Apollo. Uttering oracles, she leaned against the navel of the earth, symbolizing the center of the human world as known by that time. Priests put down the oracles into verse, but with indefinite contents, so that the person who asked the question had to choose the answer on his or her own, in accordance with his or her ideas and mentality. Many of the ancient oracles are still remembered. Even in the Vatican, in the center of the Catholic world, the Delphic prophetess is represented in a painting by Michelangelo. For example, Pythia predicted for one family the birth of a boy who would become a famous philosopher. He was named Pythagoras in honor of the prophetess. On the foundation blocks of the Temple of Apollo, there were texts of hymns with the musical notes, invented by Pythagoras. The sanctuary of Apollo in Delphi was a sacred place for the ancient Greeks. Every Greek city-state strived to be represented in this place in a form of treasury chests, statues, or the other monuments to be under the protection of the mighty god Apollo. In 336 BC, the powerful king of Macedonia, Philip II, sent his representative there in order to obtain an oracle about his fate and the future fate of his kingdom, situated in the north of the Greek world. When the envoy came back, he announced Pythia's answer to the Macedonian king: "The bull is wearing the garland, the end is near, the one who will perform the sacrifice is ready." Aegae, the ancient capital of the Macedonian kingdom, was situated at the foot of the Pierian Mountains in the valley where the sacred Macedonian Aliakmon River flows. In 337 BC, scandal erupted in the royal family. King Philip divorced his wife Olympias and married a young Macedonian girl, Cleopatra. In the shadow of the ancient royal palace in Aegae, the ruins that have been preserved to our days, the tragedy of Macedonian King Philip II took place. The former wife of Philip II, Olympias, gave birth to Philip's son, the great hero and the future king Alexander, and his daughter Cleopatra. After the divorce, Olympias went to Epirus, which was under the reign of her brother Alexander Molossus. After his wedding with Cleopatra, where he had a quarrel with his son Alexander, Philip II took great pains to neutralize the intrigues of Olympias and to make peace with Alexander. He decided to arrange the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra with Alexander Molossus, the brother of his former wife. Young Alexander was the official heir to the throne of the Kingdom of Macedonia, and took a neutral stand in the quarrel between his parents. Alexander did his best to help his father in the preparation of the campaign against Persia. In early August of 336 BC, on the closing wedding day ceremony at the theater near the royal palace, a procession carrying 12 statues of Olympic gods and the statue of King Philip went through the streets. The procession was followed by the king himself, accompanied by the bridegroom, his son Alexander, and royal bodyguards. When passing through the theater archway, Philip II was left alone and was assassinated by his bodyguard Pausanias. Pausanias tried to escape but was killed by other bodyguards who had just reached the archway. Such was the tragic end of the 46-year-old great king of Macedonia, Philip II, who had turned a poor shepherd country into a flourishing kingdom during the 23 years of his reign. He achieved to be elected as the hegemon of the whole of Greece, with the exception of Sparta, at a meeting of the League of Corinth, where all Greek city-states had voted in his favor. How did he manage to do it, and who ordered his assassination? Philip was born in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, into the king's family. Philip's mother Eurydice, nicknamed the Wild One by her contemporaries, caused a bloody conflict inside the royal family, brought on by her involvement with the husband of her own daughter. Eurydice had a wayward character because her motherland was the Upper Illyrian province. The wide streets of Pella witnessed the killings committed by the two lovers. First, they poisoned Philip's father, King Amyntas, and his sister. The elder brother, who succeeded him to the throne, was killed by the queen's lover. Power was then seized by Eurydice and her lover. These stone foundations and mosaic-laid floors in Pella were silent witnesses when another brother of Philip, Perdiccas, killed the queen's lover and seized control over Macedonia. However, he soon died in war against a mountain tribe of Illyrians provoked by his mother. Upon his return to Macedonia, the 23-year-old Philip assumed power as the guardian of the infant son of his deceased brother Perdiccas. A year later, he became King Philip II by decision of the Macedonian Military Council. From that moment, nothing is known about the fate of Eurydice except for a statue pedestal. However, we know that Philip attended mysteries of ancient Kabiri gods on Samothrace Island, where he underwent purification and initiation rituals. Philip's coming to the throne heralded the beginning of the famous history of Macedonia. His fate and his country's history were determined by the forces that ruled the world from the top of the Olympus Mountains. Ancient Hellenists believed that the world was ruled by the Olympic gods who lived on the tops of two mountains in the Olympus mountain mass in Macedonia, Mytikas and Stephani. The pantheon of Olympic gods was headed by Zeus. He was considered to rule the whole Achaemenid as was known by that time. Both gods and humans worshipped him as the most powerful god. Since the ancient times, Macedonians worshipped Zeus and other gods in Dion, the sacred city at the foot of Mount Olympus. In the temple of Zeus, they sacrificed animals to the god, organized military meetings in the nearby temple, and held sports competitions, following the traditions of Hellenes. But only when Philip came to the throne of the Macedonian kingdom did the greatest god Zeus turn his attention to Macedonia. When Philip assumed power, he first set to work on the creation of a professional army based on infantrymen. He armed Macedonian warriors with a long pike called sarissa, which was up to 7 meters long, while the pike of a Greek hoplite was only 2.5 meters long. A warrior had to hold such a long pike with 2 hands, and that is why he wore a small shield on his left forearm. The warriors were organized into detachments where the first 5 rows held their sarissas forwards, while up to 11 following rows held them upwards. They formed a phalanx, the powerful thrust of which no army of that time could resist. Due to its strong discipline and constant training, a phalanx could quickly change its formation or direction of movement. Philip also armed Macedonian cavalry with sarissas. It was difficult for an enemy to resist the attack of the wedge-shaped formation of Macedonian cavalrymen. Cavalry and phalanx always acted in such a way to literally put the enemy between the hammer and the anvil. Having built the professional army, Philip started conquering neighboring territories. In this, he used such warfare methods as intelligence, careful choosing of a battlefield, and complicated engineering devices for the sieges of fortresses, but also personal diplomacy. His famous saying was, "To seize a fortress, I need a path where a gold-laden jackass can pass." Philip undertook a constant series of campaigns to seize territories in the north, west, east, and south. First, he conquered his neighbors, the Illyrian and Thracian tribes, Paeonia, and such key cities on the coast of the Thermopylae Gulf and in Chalkidiki as Pydna, Potidea, Olynthus, Amphipolis, and others. Thessaly became a Macedonian ally, and their cavalry formed an important detachment of the Macedonian army. In the west, Philip gave the throne of Epirus to his wife's brother, Alexander Molossus. In the east, Philip reached Byzantium and Perinthus, and though he failed to seize them, he compensated the failure by a successful campaign against Scythia. In the lands he conquered, Philip organized the development of gold and silver mines. The metals were used to produce the famous coins, Philippostators, to fund his military campaigns. Philip II was a loving man who was married 7 times. The most well-known of his wives was Olympias, nicknamed the Epirus Sorceress by Macedonians because of her passion for magic rituals involving snakes. Philip met Olympias on Samothrace Island, where they were taking part in the great god's Kabiri mysteries. In this mystic place, a sculpture of Zeus's companion, the goddess Nike of Samothrace, was found. The statue is now exhibited in the Louvre. After purification and initiation rituals, Philip married Olympias. According to the legend, Alexander was also conceived by Zeus, the king of gods and humans, in the form of a snake, which is why Alexander believed himself to be the son of God and the son of King Philip at the same time. Pythia from Delphi confirmed it in her conversation with Alexander. To the royal family at the foot of the Olympus Mountains, the future hero called Alexander the Great was born. He demonstrated great abilities from his childhood, and Philip did his best to train the future heir to the Macedonian throne. Philip invited the famous philosopher Aristotle to educate his son. As the teacher's fee, Philip restored the previously destroyed Stagira, the native city of Aristotle. Philip provided the teaching team led by Aristotle his villa in Mieza near Pella. The great Greek philosopher gave his royal pupil and a group of children from Macedonian noble families the best education possible in those times. The courses lasted 3 years. In a quiet grove where nymphs once lived in caves, Aristotle gave his pupils the basics of philosophy, politics, and metaphysics while walking around the many picturesque places. This was where Alexander acquired the knowledge which would help him in his military campaigns of the future. This is where the world outlook of the future king of all the civilized world, Alexander the Great, was conceived. This was the first example of educating the heir to the throne that was organized by Philip. This is something that no king up to that time had ever done. Alexander the Great, son of the mortal King Philip of Macedonia and the immortal king of gods and humans Zeus, treated his earthborn father with affection. It is from him that Alexander would inherit a well-organized kingdom and a professional army. In the 4th century BC, the city-state of Athens played an important role in the Greek world. Achievements of its citizens in architecture, trade, culture, and philosophy were admired by both Hellenists and barbarians. Philip loved and respected Athens. He never tried to seize Athens by force, even when he had every opportunity to do so. However, Athens prevented Philip from uniting the Greek world for a campaign against Persia, as the strengthening Macedonian kingdom was threatening Athens' democracy. In that period, political life in Athens was dominated by Demosthenes. Demosthenes was a confirmed opponent of Philip II and did his best to create a coalition of Greek states against Macedonia. Oratory skill achieved by Demosthenes as a result of hard work allowed him to have necessary decisions approved at the general meetings of the citizens of Athens. In his famous speeches, the Philippics on Pnyx, he exposed the imperialist policy of Philip and warned the people of Athens of the dangers that the king posed. Soon a time would come when Athens and Macedonia were to face each other on the battlefield. This day came in 339 BC on the pretext of freeing the sacred land of Delphi seized by the Locrians. Philip went through the famous Thermopylae pass with 30,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. This pass was an important road in ancient Greece because it was convenient for communications between the north and south regions. It was the place where 150 years before, 300 Spartans led by King Leonidas held off thousands of troops in the Persian army of Xerxes. However, on passing Thermopylae, the Macedonian army did not go to the Locrian capital Amphissa, but instead seized Elatea fortress near the northern slopes of Mount Parnassus on the border with Boeotia. Here the Macedonians settled for more than 9 months. Having learned of Elatea's fate, which was situated at a 2-day walking distance from Athens, its citizens decided to wage war on Macedonia, obviously influenced by the speeches of Demosthenes. Demosthenes convinced the neighboring city-state of Thebes to join Athens. The union of Athens and Thebes was soon joined by other Greek city-states. early September of 338 BC, Philip finally decided to fight the united Greek army after a long period of reflection. This battle took place in the Chaeronian field, where both sides had approximately equal forces. The Macedonian army stood at an angle to the front of the Greek troops. Philip commanded the right flank, the phalanxes of which lined up against the Athenian hoplites. Athenian soldiers were considered a weaker part of the army due to lack of military experience. The heavily armed Macedonian cavalry, led by the 18-year-old heir to the throne Alexander, was positioned against the right flank of the Greek army of Boeotians and the famous sacred band of Thebes, consisting of male couples fighting together who formed the very end of this flank. Philip probably felt that Alexander would make the decisive contribution in the battle against the Greeks, as he laid his hopes on the help of the heavenly guardian. And it actually happened thus, while Philip with his flank started implementing a complex maneuver of bringing the phalanx back and then attacking again in order to break the Greek lines, his son Alexander led the cavalry against the sacred band of Thebes. The charge of Macedonian cavalry attacking in a wedge formation and supported by Thessalian riders was unexpected for both the Greek top commanders and the elite detachment of Boeotians. This attack made a lasting impression on all participants of the battle. Despite their extensive fighting experience, the male couples could not resist the Macedonian cavalry led forward by the young commander. The sacred band was entirely destroyed, and that allowed the cavalry to hit the rear of the Greek troops. Therefore, the Greeks had to switch to defense and started retreating. In the end, the Macedonians surrounded the Greeks. Some of them managed to flee, including Demosthenes, who fought along other Athenians, and some had to surrender. It was the direct attack by the Macedonian cavalry, led by Alexander, which decided the battle. Despite the extermination of the sacred band, Philip paid his tribute to the fallen male couples. He ordered a monument erected in the shape of a lion, watching the place where the Boeotians had died. The sacred band warriors had only their fighting skills to set against the Macedonian cavalry, and that revealed itself insufficient to resist the son of a god. In the Zeus sanctuary of Olympia, near the temple of the king of gods and humans, where the sculpture of the greatest god made by Pheidias was erected, Philip built a round tholos called Philippeion to perpetuate the victory of the Macedonians at Chaeronea. It featured statues of the king, queen, and their son Alexander. The victorious Battle of Chaeronea was the main victory in Philip's life that allowed him to unite the Macedonians and the Greeks for his future campaign in the east. Philippeion became the symbol of the Macedonians and the Greeks uniting into a single world under the aegis of Zeus Olympius. By the time he was 46, Philip II of Macedon had achieved everything his ancestors dreamed of. He created a kingdom with a powerful army, he became the hegemon of the whole of Greece, except for Sparta. He was preparing a campaign against the Persians, the eternal foe of all Greeks, and this is when he was assassinated by his own bodyguard. Philip was buried in the sacred Macedonian city, the ancient capital of Aegae. The richly decorated tomb contains the remains of Philip together with his belongings, as befits a king. The frieze of the tomb still preserves a picture dated back to the 4th century BC, showing a royal hunting trip of Philip and his heir. We know the name of his assassin, the king's bodyguard Pausanias, a nobleman from the mountainous area called Orestes. But who was the mastermind behind this crime? Perhaps it was his former wife Olympias, who desired revenge for her injured pride. Or it might have been his son Alexander, who was afraid to lose the title of heir to the throne. Or Demosthenes could have been the mastermind of the plot, trying to return freedom to the Greek city-states. Or King Darius III, who had only a short time ago ascended to the throne of the Persian Empire, may have organized the plot in order to prevent being attacked by a united army of Macedonians and Greeks. Or it could have been the intrigues of princes from the upper Macedonian province of Lyngestis, who desperately struggled for power. Or was it Zeus, the king of gods and humans, who had decided Philip's lot by his judgment? Upon Philip's death, Macedonia was ruled by his son, Alexander III, the Great, who led the united Macedonian and Greek troops to the east and crushed the Persian Empire. Or could it be the heavenly father of Alexander the Great who gave him his incredible fame?